we have this amazing brain to think about this, the power to imagine things and create things. And I mean, these indomitable spirit is something that I get excited about.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 44th episode of Pine Copper Line, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can find Pine Copper Line on Patreon, Instagram, Facebook, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter with print news from around the world at pinecopperline.com. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. My guest this week is Koichi Yamamoto. Many of you may know him from his beautiful kites printed with otherworldly faces. As I got to know Koichi more during our interview, I realized that he is a global citizen who has been taken around the world in his pursuit of art and new experiences. He was born in Osaka, Japan, educated in Wyoming in the United States, traveled and studied printmaking in Eastern Europe just a year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, designed tablecloths in Denmark, went to graduate school in Edmond at the University of Alberta, and so much more, before landing at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where he currently teaches intaglio printmaking. He talks about it all with a beautiful philosophy of life and art. You are in for a treat, print friends. A quick note on the sound quality. Skype was acting up a bit, so the first 15 minutes of our interview has a really little quiet, light buzz. But don't worry, it drops out after that. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and get ready to move mountains with Koichi Yamamoto. Hi, Koichi. How's it going?
Very good. How are you?
I'm good. How is quarantine treating you?
It's been a good opportunity to sort of reevaluate, what is the motivation for artwork. And in a way, it has been very nice, uninterrupted time that I can focus on working small plate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know that a lot of your work can be quite large scale. Are you finding the quarantine times getting you a little more focused? You said on a small plate.
Smaller plate, but I think I'm going to be working with a large number of the plate.
Mm-hmm.
So each print's going to be relatively small, but they're going to sort of combine together, become a larger piece of work. I think that's kind of my vision right now.
Ah, beautiful. Well, I'd love to talk about that maybe a little bit more later to sort of hear what, the quarantine project is for you. But before we get too far into things, would you mind just letting people know who you are, where you are, and what you do?
My name is Koichi Yamamoto. I teach printmaking at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I've been teaching here in Tennessee for about 12 years now. And we have been working together mostly I work teaching an intaglio relief section. But as a team, as a group with Professor Bobby Lyons and Professor Althea Markey Price, three of us, we work together to run the program together.
Beautiful, yeah. So that's where you are now, but where did you grow up? And tell me a little bit about the role of art in that time of your life.
I was born and raised in Osaka, Japan, and then I grew up in 70s and 80s, I guess. And I wanted to learn English language, and so I moved to Sheridan, Wyoming, northern part of Wyoming, a small town, and that's why I went to high school there. I moved there in 1983. I was 15 years old, and then I was going to be there just for a year or two, but I ended up staying there for longer than I anticipated, and then I ended up finishing up in high school and studying geology at the local community college in Sheridan, Wyoming. And after that, 1988, I moved to Portland, Oregon. And that's what I started going to the art school And first I was interested in making ceramics, and then I was working with clay and sculpture pieces and sort of land art, I guess, placing the clay and unfired clays in certain locations and watching how things would deteriorate. So these are kind of work I did in the Portland and the Oregon coast. And then I met Professor Mona Burks. She's a printmaker. She's a Tamarind educated printmaker. And I was working for her, sponging her stone, and that's how I learned lithography. And so that was my sort of first encounter with the printmaking. Pacific Northwest, like Seattle, Portland area, has a wonderful community of the artists. They sort of help each other. I didn't know anything about printmaking at the time, but the meeting with Mona Burks, and then also in the Portland Art Museum, they have this wonderful collection of the Golden Gilkey graphic collection, which is the Golden Gilkey was a person. He was a professor at the Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon, part of the Portland Art Museum. But during the World War II, he was assigned by U.S. military to do search of this. The artwork was discarded by Germany during the World War II time. Yeah, so he has so for that reason, in Portland Art Museum in Oregon, they have a very large collection of the German expressionist prints. And also, it's not just German work, but also a lot of work coming from Eastern Europe. It's coming from Yugoslavia, Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus, and Romania, and places like that. And so I got to see those graphic work coming from Eastern Europe, and that was my inspiration. That's exactly why I was interested. And at the time, and 1989, the Berlin Wall fell down, and I was still in college at the time. And I found a way to go to Poland. And in 1992, I think I moved to Warsaw there, and then started to find a place to print. But I couldn't really find. First, I found this really obscure print shop underneath this military institution. And then there's a strange kind of sign that art club is in English language. The art club, what the hell is this thing? They go down this basement, and then I meet with this Polish soldiers. They're basically pickled with the alcohol. They're major drunk soldiers. They're too dangerous to handle guns and military equipment, so they're staying in the basement and they're making the artwork. And then so I ended up working with those guys for a while. It was an interesting environment. I didn't speak Polish, but so our communication was basically drinking alcohol and singing a song, and somehow we communicated. But that was big 1992. It was right after about 3 years after the Berlin Wall fell down. So a lot of uncertainty in the atmosphere in Poland at the time.
So I'm just so confused a little bit about where exactly it was in Poland. So was it like a military sponsored institution, or had these soldiers just kind of found their way to the art club?
No. This was a legit military institution. It was as a part of the military institution that they create. I think it's a propaganda work is probably the right word, because it's not just a fine art. They had a radio broadcasting, they have a filmmaking, and they had a sculpture even too. There's a lot of this whole sort of like a academy of this art in the military back setting. It's kind of strange. And then of course the artwork or the production comes out from the institutions usually associated with the military propaganda work. I guess the sponsored art institution, I guess. So I get to kind of see the remnants of that work. But the crazy part was that it was early 90s. There was a war was going on in Yugoslavia, and so a lot of people, refugees, are kind of running away from war, and then some are the very well-known artists, professors coming from academy in Croatia, and they'll come out here. They've lost the whole entire family. They were devastated situation, but the Polish government opened up the housing for them or the art studio for them, So I ended up in an artist union in the Krakow in Poland, southern part of the Poland. Yeah. I couldn't go to academy because in order to become a official academy students, I had to pay, and I didn't have money for it. But I could go to this artist union studio, and I paid a small amount of money, a fee, to use it, has access to print studio. I was doing lithography at the time, and then that's where I met a lot of artists coming from Yugoslavia and Romania and so on, and then listening their stories. It's pretty devastating. I mean, this is a pre-internet time, early 90s, and so it's the communication information was rather limited. And I mean, I didn't speak Polish at the time, so all this information I hear in the radios coming from broken BBC, broadcasting coming from. So that's what I was information source, but early 90s. But so yeah, that was the time I was producing work. But fortunately, I got to do marketing through this gallery in Portland, and then so I got to sustain my living as an artist, producing work in Krakow. So I'll come to Oregon back to the United States once a year. So I'll have an exhibit, and then I'll sell some work, and I transfer money back to Poland, and then an exchange rate was. The dollar was strong, and zloty, the Polish currency, was very, very weak at the time. And then so the value I was making a whole lot of money in the United States, but it was enough amount to have somewhat of a comfortable living in Poland, So it was kind of my way to sort of buy time, I guess, as an artist. And I thought about what is the most important things. Of course, having a studio and the materials and so on. But the most essential, the part is the time. That's the most expensive part, I think. And so that's another reason I stayed in Poland to produce artwork. And then I wasn't really thinking ahead or anything. I was just, at the time I just needed a place to produce work, and then early 90s, that was the perfect time for me to be in Eastern Europe. I mean, of course, this was a challenging place, and in fact, it was a bit of the racism was started picking up because during the socialist time that they have to sort of help each other, and but when the socialism ended, that they were started raising their own flag, and the sort of nationalism started picking up. The problem is that life is not getting any better, so easy target as if myself looks foreign, and then so that I become a target, and so I got a couple of incidents. I was lynched by skinheads once, and I had pepper sprayed once, and so on. So it's funny that, you kind of hear about this sort of racism and so on that I didn't really experience a whole lot in the United States. I'm sure there is too, but I really experienced more that vivid, like physical threat of the racism in Eastern Europe. It was like the first time in my life, and so it was a bit of scary. I ended up once I was in Slovakia, I ended up in the hospital. So that's another reason I just left there. But so that's early 90s in Eastern Europe. But definitely that I was really fascinated. It was a graphic work coming from it. And also during the 80s, they had this interesting history of changing course of the Polish history by without spilling too much blood, meaning that the solidarity movement in the 80s, like Wałęsa led, and they had a sort of secret gathering together, but if they were to be too obvious about their meeting and they're being marked by military police and then being reported, so they had to be really subtle about their communication. So they made this posters look like a theater, but actually the event was made for anti-socialist gathering, for instance.
Wow.
So they're really creative, very crafty about gathering of people. We have to understand this is a pre-internet time, so they're very stealth, and also the signal of the content was well communicating among the people who were unhappy with the socialist government at the time.
Yeah.
And then so those people united. So it is a very, very interesting example of how visual communication can change the course of the human behavior and change the history of a nation in this case.
Yeah.
And so that's another fascination about the live in Poland, graphic histories and so on.
So with the posters, did you think that would there be any chance that somebody would show up actually expecting a theater production? Do you think there was any risk of that? And find an anti-socialist meeting instead? Or was it coded like just right?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm of course I don't know everything about the circumstances, and that's the sort of history, and those kind of legendary history has been colored up and emphasized or exaggerated at some level. So I could imagine some people would show up and expecting some particular opera or theater, and then wait a minute, that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah.
It might have happened. I don't know. I could have been some comical version of that. But I think that at the time, my understanding of the solidarity movement in the 80s in Poland, that is the people are already upset. They already had some clear dissatisfaction with the socialist government already, and then that's why the 99% of the Polish people are sort of registered as a Catholic, because as long as they're a member of the church, the government can really touch them. And even the socialist government, they're afraid of the picking a fight with a Catholic church.
Right.
So that's why the church church organization was sort of a haven for the anti-communist, anti-socialist gathering, I think. So yeah, I could imagine some of the content has association with Christianity content, but I'm sure loaded with some metaphors.
Yeah.
And then. Yeah, they know exactly what they're talking about. So I think there's kind of fascinating history about that.
Yeah. So how many years total were you in Poland then?
I was there 3 years in Poland and 1 year in Slovakia,
Okay.
in Bratislava. Yeah, and Bratislava was because a lot of graphic work coming from Czechoslovakia at the time. It was one country. Were a little different from Polish graphic, and then what happened was this what you call the Bohemian culture, I guess. There's a southern part of the Poland to the Austria, and between that, the area of the culture, they have a lot of sort of mountain culture, I guess. I mean you find those Chileans in Switzerland, and they kind of share the similar culture. There's a mountaineer, the Gurara culture, they call it themselves. And then they are very industrial folk, and therefore they have a very different sort of color of. For instance, Czech Republic was a very, very advanced and for instance industrial. After the Industrial Revolution, the Soviet wants to have a control over the Czech Republic, but they are very strong. So the Slovakia kind of maintained that. They had a little more the voice than Poland, I think. So the graphic work came out from Slovakia was a little more aggressive and then almost funny in the level. There's a humor in there that I loved it most. So that's kind of end up in the Bratislava and Slovakia. It was a time that was Slovakia was separating. They had a relatively peaceful separation between Czech Republic and Slovakia. And so it was very interesting to see this, even the currency that they're using the same currency, the koruna, but the Slovakia side has a sticker on it. So there's somebody manual in the bank putting a sticker on each current the money to make sure it's separate. Kind of wild concept, but that's some typical of the socialist kind of anecdote.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I studied in Slovakia. That's why I learned to do copper engraving. And engraving is a medium that there's not many people do this anymore. It's a slow, it's a pain in the butt. It requires very specific patience, and it's definitely not for everybody. But I was really fascinated with that because the fact that I don't really have to use any acid, I can use I can make it anywhere, and then so that the mobility that I was fascinated with the copper engraving, also the mark making too as well. So it's more classical, and then I was excited about that challenge of a traditional mark making by engraving. So I learned from a copper engraver. His name is Dushan Kalai. He does illustration for children's book, and then illustrator. And so I learned in this studio in Slovakia for 1 year, and got to do some engraving and then lithographies and more like illustration, I think, rather than printmaking. And then later on, I moved back to Poland. I went to academy in Poznan, Poland. I went to academy there for 1 year. I mean, these are the time that I have no idea what's going to happen next year because of finance and all that things, and it was extremely uncertain. But somehow I just walked through this thin ice and survived through creating, making artwork, and just looking back and just thinking about, oh my God, I went through this scary journey, but. But somehow I made it through, and I had a sponsor in Oregon Coast, and then we had a contract together, and then he would buy my artwork, like 20 prints and then so he will sponsor me the amount of money that I asked for it. So he was quite generous to do this agreement, and very, very supportive on that way. So with these kind of people's help, and I was capable of making these kind of things happen in a place like Eastern Europe.
And with that favorable exchange rate is just, that makes such a huge difference. I know so many artists this day who are living in places like in Thailand. One of the things the artists say is make dollars, spend baht, and you can live as an artist.
Yeah, what do you call it? Outsourcing, but self outsourcing. I'm making myself outsource.
Yeah, exactly.
Going to the place was cheap. But Eastern Europe is not same anymore. Of course, I'm speaking about 20, 30 years ago, so things are different. And just Poland, Slovakia, and then I did a lot of printmaking back there and did some illustration. And then I'm married with a Danish person, and then I was living in Denmark for 1 year and working as a designer for a tablecloth company. It's called Georgie Jensen, I guess that's it's a pretty well-known tablecloth and cartons, and I didn't know anything about textile design, but I just made a pattern and then they liked it, and so I got into that to the business, and then I worked for them for a while. Did some design for tablecloths and so on, and it was unique experience. But the reason I'm telling you that is that the time I was learned how to make a pattern with a mirror, and that's exactly what I'm doing right now. It's funny how the 20 years later experience sort of pops up, and like the work I do today has been sort of planted 20 years ago.
Yeah. What do you mean use the design with the mirror, or make the design with the mirror?
Making a pattern for like a tablecloth, for instance, the pattern image has to be repeatable. So they have a section. They have this fancy software, but old days what they had was a L-shaped mirror, basically. So try to imagine you have a piece of paper, right? And then you have a mirror right next to it, and then right above it too. So this L-shaped mirror.
Yeah.
And then so anything you draw is going to be repeated and create a pattern. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, I can picture it for sure.
You can picture it, right?
Almost like a snowflake or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just like snowflake. Yeah. And the same concept, and just using a mirror and making patterns. And that's kind of how they did it in the old days. And then I got to use their tool to make those patterns. And then it's so funny, like that I've been working with the symmetry image making, and then now I'm kind of doing that thing. So I learned that in textile design.
Yeah.
Funny thing is how the life that is, why we are doing something or focus on doing things that we don't even know why we're doing that. But later on in the life just sort of makes sense. Like, wow, because I did this, that's why it's sort of connected together. I don't know, like sometimes we try to make sense of nonsense, but sometimes the anything we do in our life that we will, it is part of becoming part of ourselves, and then becoming useful tools, I think.
Well, I think that's really good for people to hear, particularly right now, when I think people are finding themselves in challenging situations where maybe they're doing things that they didn't think that they would ever
Mm-hmm.
need to do. And it's, again, as you kind of, if you're on this little boat on the sea of life, you really truly never know what skills, whether literal skills like creating the patterning with the mirror, or even just emotional skills you pick up, are going to come and serve
Right.
you later on, and you'll be happy you have them in your tool bag. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Survival toolkit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you were in Denmark and you're doing the design there. Were you still getting to work on your
Yeah.
prints? Were you still doing engravings during all of this as well?
What I was doing, I was working I had a press at home, so I was working with a Sintra actually. I went to my graduate program in Canada in Edmonton, and that was another sort of period in my life that I mean, I was looking for the graduate program, but of course I didn't have any money, but
Mm.
they come up with the funding, so I that's how I ended up in Edmonton. It turned out to be really, really great program, and it's in a way I had a both world. My networking with the Eastern Europe and also my heritage as a Japanese, and it was just perfect match because
Mm.
the institution, University of Alberta, they have a great close networking with the Japan as well as Poland. So I studied Polish. I never thought I would use Polish outside of Poland, but no, I was wrong. I was meeting a lot of Polish people in Edmonton,
Oh,
so
interesting.
that was
Yeah.
great. So, yeah. Yeah, never know, never know. So yeah, that living in Edmonton, that was my graduate program degree, and then finish up and live in Denmark for a while, and then looking for the academic job, and then I finally got one in the Utah State, and I
Mm-hmm.
moved to state of Utah in the year 2000, I think. Yeah, year 2000. That's right. And then moved there with my wife at the time, with my son. So three of us we moved to Utah, and then so that was interesting because I loved it, great outdoor, and then going skiing, and so it was a perfect environment for me just to be able to do my kind of hobby as well as artwork too. So that was kind of interesting living in Utah, and then I spent a lot of time in the southern Utah and then northern Arizona area
Oh,
to
it's
do a lot
beautiful
of
there.
drawings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then particularly because during the daytime it's so hot, so I started doing hiking in the nighttime actually, and then once
Mm.
moon's up, it's quite a remarkable to see the world in the full color range, and during the daytime versus dark, and then under the moonlight, everything is in different filter coloration. It's a fast, beautiful world. Anyway, so that my experience in Southern Utah still come back with my work today, and then when I think about it, those kind of landscape formats I
Mm.
created monochromatic work has a lot to do with the Southern Utah, Northern Arizona landscape.
Yeah, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that you really have two really distinctive sides of your work. And they're both absolutely iconic, really aesthetically distinctive. And it's these large monotypes that are just so moody and gestural and powerful in this kind of monumental way. And then, of course, your super, super detailed engravings and other intaglio works. So we're touching on it a little bit, but would you say you think you came to develop these kind of two sides with very different feels that you do also incorporate together as well into single pieces?
That's a great question. I've been thinking a lot about that, and
Hmm.
then I think about this static object is seemingly static, but it really never have been, and everything's so dynamic. Meaning that like a geological feature of the southern Utah, very raw Earth surface being exposed, and so the evidence is more clear than the trees and forest that covers up. We can't really see it, but a place like it in like a high desert, the erosion is very, very clear. What's going on? So the process, the Earth has never been quiet place, and so constantly moving and dynamic. And then we're sort of lucky enough to be able to survive on this very, very limited space, I guess, and then extremely vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
To think about what's going on today. Yeah. But this with a given vulnerable condition now, I mean, we have this amazing brain to think about, the power to imagine things and create things. And I mean, the indomitable spirit is something that I get excited about life in general, I think. I mean, do you remember when you were in the science class and you're a kid? Your science teacher tell you there's so many stars out there. There's more stars than there was a sand on the beach or something, and then just like sitting in the classroom thinking about like, oh my God, I'm so small, right? But here's a small tiny brain that we all have, but this brain can imagine and think and then create and then communicate. I mean, I think that's pretty significant. I think. So it's not something to underestimate on that. But yes, definitely that understanding a scale, and then also this seemingly non-dynamic or static object, but has a dynamic energy is something that I constantly think about, even making the artwork or landscape, the large monotype you mentioned about that. I try to establish sort of landscape. It's almost like a liquid, I guess, in order to understand the Earth's geology. Just easier to think that everything is a fluid.
Right.
And rock, mountain seems static. Yes, it is. It hasn't moved for a while, but of course, this is based on a human-centric perspective. But from the geological term, I guess everything is in constant motion. Nothing is not moving. Everything's moving. Yeah, so that's the kind of the world I think about it. And then so another aspect of my work of being very, very tedious and in small detail is basically those sediment of the time, I think. And then there was a quiet little small motion, but when it happens number of the time, and it started creating its more dynamic power to it. That's why I'm attracted to this small work that requires a lot of intensity and to it. But also the large monotype is a little more dynamic and spontaneous, which is a very, very different attitude of mark making. It kind of frees me up too, actually. It kind of feels nice to make the large piece of art.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's sort of like a yin to the yang almost, in that focus.
Yeah, it's almost this is a fascinating thing about the pleasure and torture, right? And
right.
So here I'm myself, and then I locked myself in this studio working on this 9x12 copper plate, putting all my conscious energy into this. It's like, is this a pleasure or a torture? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, but fascinating. But then, end of the day, that gives you somewhat of a satisfaction. So I guess it is a pleasure after all. But yeah. That's the kind of creature of the human mind.
It is. And I think it goes back to a little bit what we talked about before, about how in these weird quarantine days, how you need to find that balance between work and pleasure. And it's you have to have the work. Like, you have to make yourself work in order to have the pleasure of not working.
Right. That's right.
Which is exactly kind of what you're talking about, like with that, just, taking on something so painstaking and time consuming, and then having it, the release of the finished product and being sort of satisfied with something is that spring back of the rubber band that you're pulling, or whatever sort of metaphor one wanted to use for it.
building up the energy, I guess, the rubber band metaphor, right? Which is basically building up this potential energy.
And so, in terms of the actual imagery that you use in your intaglio works, you've got these almost seemingly endless variety of these really distinctive faces or creatures. I'm not sure what you think of them as, but
Yeah.
they're very
Uh-huh.
expressive and unique and like a portrait. Where do those come
Right.
from, and kind of what are they to you?
Well, they're mixture things, and I collect those sort of iconic things that are sort of ordinary, but it's extraordinary at the same time. And then, like for instance, the image resource. A lot of the buildings in Japan, architecture, old architecture in Japan, and the rooftop, they usually have those ceramic tile with a face on it.
Oh,
Yeah, kind of like a gargoyle, basically,
okay.
to keep the evil spirits away, that kind of thing. And also, some of the building, the ceramic tiles has an association with the fish because in case of fire, the fish can bring the water, and then so that it's like a kind of like a mental sprinkler, I guess, and
Hmm.
having this fish on top of the building, so that hopefully this place will not gonna catch on fire
Yeah.
or something. And then these are icons, and I found in Japan, or another place I found those ceramic figurine. Find in a place like in Ecuador in South America, and the Quichua culture, for instance, they will, if their family member pass away, especially when woman has a miscarriage or so, the baby will never be born, but they will have this, they will make this some ceramic figurine and they will keep it in the house.
Hmm.
It won't have a name or anything, but they're just sort of member of the family, just never being born, but
Mm-hmm.
we won't forget about it. So they has a little bit of kind of spiritual sort of reliance, I guess, in those kind of objects. Kind of not necessarily worship, but makes it feel good, makes it feel secure, I guess, feel kind of protected or something. And
Mm.
then these are kind of the faces that I found this really fascinating. And then also the even this industrial psychology, like the automobile we buy or the building we live and the tools we use, they all have a faces if you notice
Right.
it. If you look
Yeah.
for it, you find it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
like a driving in a family van looks a little more a family van versus if you're driving a sports car, it looks a little meaner look to it, you know. So they have
Totally.
this sort of attitude. Isn't that they have a face, and then we interpret it as the face because we're human, and then that's kind of how we judge things, and then how we I mean I think this is, I'm speaking about the market industry, but I think it's nice to have the face so we can relate to it. That's kind of basic human need. Maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
what I try to bring, that sort of eyes, and then yes, if even it's not eyes, but if there is a dot, a two dot, and then we read as a
We
eyes,
do.
yes.
Yeah. It's I heard Paul Wunderlich, the great late great German lithographer, once answer a question about why are you so interested in the human body? Why is it always in all your work? And he said, "Oh,
Uh-huh.
I'm not particularly interested in the human body. It's just the thing that I can
Uh-huh.
distort the most that people will still see as something."
Ah.
And I think there might be a bit of that
Uh-huh.
too in what you're saying about the faces, is that because, we're so
Yeah.
programmed to see human figures, to see faces, to see human or human-esque, or at least something with two forward-facing eyes looking back at us, you
Right.
can play with it and
Yeah.
really, really push it, and people will still see it as an emotional
Uh-huh.
thing, even if it's abstracted to the point
Yeah.
of almost just, oblivion.
It's a lot of religious symbols. Quite often they use that. I mean, particularly in the Christianity, often you find that things often. But yeah, definitely. I mean, having that security and power, and also the sense of trust, and I think there's a lot of things that you find that, and that sort of balance the face, maybe, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I think about it, like I just thought about Wendy's burger logo, because of Wendy's burger, because it's a Wendy, she's there, right?
Yeah.
And then she's kind of symmetry. She has a face, she has a freckle, she has a red hair, And I mean, these are the important elements, right, in the
Mm-hmm.
way it makes it. Even the Kentucky Colonel has a face too,
Totally.
when I think about it.
Well, that's the thing
Oh, that's
is,
the scary faces.
yeah. We love having something looking back at us and it gives us a warmth, I think. And so,
That's right.
I'm not a nameless chicken murderer. I'm the Colonel. I'm like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
makes people feel so differently about what they're interfacing with when they have that.
right. Yeah, the glasses makes the chicken taste better.
Yeah, exactly. It's so friendly now.
Yeah.
When you're speaking of the symmetry actually in Wendy, it reminded me that I wanted to ask you a bit about your particular technique to create them because they are
Okay.
perfect, they have that perfect kind of symmetry to them. Could you speak to that a little
Okay.
bit? Because I think it's unusual what you do.
Okay. This is very, very straightforward. It's nothing really tricky about it. Intaglio printing generally deals for a lot of ink. And relief printing or lithography, printing from flat surface to flat surface, the amount of ink transfer is limited. But intaglio ink is different. Intaglio plate has a three-dimensional depth into it. So the amount of ink transferred to the plate, to the print, to the paper surface is a lot more greater than lithography or relief printing. And you can tell really intaglio prints, like even the currency that you can touch the feel the ink raising the surface, right? So there's a physical transfer. It's not just a image transfer. It's like a physical ink movement. So
Hmm.
what I'm doing is that I make the plate is the exactly half of the whole entire thing. So try to imagine if I was gonna have a face and I would just do the right side of the face only, and then the center line is gonna be at left side of the plate.
Hmm.
And then so I'll print the half of the face. When I'm printing, I'm folding a paper, and after I print it, and then unfold the paper, and then fold the reverse, which means printed side face, the side become inside of the paper. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So, and then goes to the press again. So, what happened is image will transfer once from the plate to paper and paper to paper by folding a paper, and by unfolding it, it makes the perfect mirror image. Does it make sense? It's like kind of, I can show you in a video. It probably makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of foreknowledge about how you actually did it, so I feel like I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense to me, but we can definitely
Okay.
like put
This
a
is the,
link in the show notes to a
yeah,
video of you doing it because I think it's one of those things that when it gets
right.
described, it's inherently more complicated than if you just see it being
I
done. Yeah.
know. Do it
But
oh, duh,
yeah.
that's what it is. Yeah. The unfolded reverse folding. So that's kind of how I did it, and then it works great. I tried with different kind of papers, and then that's kind of way to create it. It was interesting. I'm gonna little has a little history about this method I developed. Was I was an artist in residency at the Anderson Ranch
Oh
once
yeah,
in
yeah. Hmm.
Snowmass, Colorado, beautiful place. And then I was working as a printmaker, but they have this wonderful ceramic studio, and then I got to use their wheel. So I spent more time working in the clay and then sitting on the wheel making a pots and the cups and so on, and then watching this the rotation of this the clay looking from above, and I thought about like, well, if I could rotate the plate not horizontally but vertically, and then so that was kind of my idea of the transfer reflection print. Sort of came out idea of the two sort of three-dimensional rotation and the vertical rotation of the plate image.
Yeah.
That was kind of idea to the fold of paper to make the symmetry image.
And now, we've talked about kind of the face that you've been making and how you get them there with that folded
Yep.
paper technique. And now people have been seeing them maybe up in the sky recently.
Yeah.
They've left the studio, they've gone like off paper as they say, and you're creating kites. I'd love to hear you talk about how you came to do that and the process of it.
Yeah, has been quite the sort of passion of my idea. I've been kind of I ask myself like, why do I make a kite and so on and so on, and I was looking at my drawing and then think about the fluidity of the line form. Sort of sometimes I kind of create this drawing, that series of line almost looks like a school of fish and creating a large form, and I think about these are. Device to describe a form as well as it's a sort of kind of fluid motion, aerodynamic or hydrodynamic, anything that sort of flows like a water or flows like a air. I think these are type of the things I was drawing. And when I was in a graduate program in Canada, a lot of my work has a lot to do with the landscape of a Scandinavian German bunkers, for instance, and then clouds and waters and then those natural elements. I was having a more fun carving out these kind of elements rather than bunkers, concrete structure itself. But so these drawings has a lot to do with the fluid movement, and then making the kite was like a sort of perfect idea of the actually to understand the aerodynamic with a very minimum amount of gear. And then in the beginning, I was making a paper airplane actually, and then so that's kind of how I started designing things. And then later on, I tried to do more sophisticated design, and then I started sewing a lot and did more. The type of the kite I was making was a non-structure kite, which means the air will inflate by itself and create shape with the pressure. It's kind of like a windsock, I guess.
Yeah.
And try to imagine that. So I will sew a bunch of this section and then put them together and then let the air goes in and then it will fly by itself. So that was kind of type of the idea of the kite I was doing with a lot of, not with the paper, it was mostly with ripstop nylons and ropes and string. So that was the kind of initial idea. But after I studied more about kite, and then I sort of kind of run into this hexagon kite. It's called kokaku kite, come from Japan. And this is an incredible kite. I saw different type of the kites and designed my own, but this simple hexagon kite is just so stable, so predictable, and easy to make, and it doesn't require a whole lot of material. And the most importantly, easy to travel with it. I can just roll up and then pack and then go. And then so I thought that was like, this is a perfect design for the kite. And so I worked together with 40 different artists. I invited 40 different artists to make a kite with me. So I asked, give them Tyvek material, and then so they will print or draw or paint or what anything you can do. They can. So they will ship to me, and I will sew them together, put the carbon fiber rods behind it, and then make a kite. And we're gonna fly this kite in Puerto Rico for the Southern Graphic.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to happen last week, but unfortunately, was a current condition that didn't happen. But so the irony of this is that I made a kite and I shipped the kite, and the day after I shipped the kite, and they announced the cancellation for the conference. And then so now they have my kites. They have it's in the Puerto Rico right now. So
it's like, they're getting to live a little bit of the life that we all hoped that we'd be living right now or last week. At least the kites get to be there.
Yeah, kite is there. And I think that what I love about the kite making, well, of course, there's a physics challenge into it, but if once I understand that the balance of the physics, it becomes very easy, and then it's a yes, definitely putting work outside a studio or gallery and just flying in the air, and also when I fly them together with a bunch of number of little kites, they start to interact with each other and become very animated. And again, I was kind of talking about dynamic and static, and then the static piece of paper with the Tyvek plastic become sort of living things in the air. And definitely this is an exciting kind of moment to see the artwork in sort of natural setting, I guess.
Yeah.
Most recently, I went to Wyoming. I was in a place called Big Horn Mountain, and there's a snowfield up there, about 10,000 feet, so about sea level. It's very flat, and then it's got a great wind there. So I flew the kite there. It's a lot of work, especially planting a kite in a high altitude like that, and that was a challenge for my lung, definitely. But it was a good experience.
So when you're in the process of taking kites and just your art and taking it, out of that gallery setting and into the world and into the wild, do you get a lot of interaction from civilians? Do people come and let you know that what they think, or do you how is the public reception?
Yes, I love it, and especially I think definitely kids. I think they're brave. They're curious. Like they want to come check it out, and then they take photograph, and then they quite often have interaction, ask questions like, what is this, like, oh, and then I think whatever they get out of it, they will take a photograph and they probably put it up on their Instagram, like, hey, look, mom, dad, what I saw today. I mean, but these kind of within these story, that there's something that they will remember, like, wow, I saw there's a strange guy flying a bunch of kite in the middle of nowhere, a totally unexpected place, snowfield in northern Wyoming, or desert and somewhere in it's sort of when I think about it, like Robert Smithson or those artists that had the land art, they'll place it in a location that it's a really, really hard to get to, in a way. So kite flying is kind of like becoming like that too. And again, it's so easy to travel with these kites, and it's lightweight, and so I can go to different location and fly the kite as long as there's a wind there. So that's kind of I've been trying to sort of justify and go in different locations flying kites. I mean, winds are pretty much the same anywhere in the world, but definitely under the different lights and different sky, the kites look slightly different.
Well, I was wondering, because I've seen them, really just beautiful documentation of them at beaches, but Knoxville isn't particularly close to a sandy beach. Is that correct? I mean, unless there's like a great riverbed there that I don't know about.
Yeah, there's not a beach, but there is it's called a Cherokee Farm. It's a part of the university agricultural farm, and then that's a nice place to fly kites. It's very flat, grassy fields. I mean, it's a good place to. I gotta watch out for the dog poop, but otherwise, it's a nice place to fly kites.
Yeah.
It's good. But you're right. It is a far away from beach, and then the one of my favorite place is Outer Banks, North Carolina, which is a great wind, uninterrupted wind, and predictable wind. Great place to fly kites. And most recently, I was in northern Wyoming in Big Horn Mountain, and last December I was in Sicily, in Italy, a place called Lastagno, which is a very west end of Sicily. That they make salt, I guess, and then they have great wind too. So I mean, kind of go into a place like that just to fly in the kite, and then with the landscape, and try to just kind of my own satisfaction of that. Those flights, travel a different world, and then flying there. It's a sort of kind of my personal project in a way. So good thing of flying kite, like even I had it's a therapeutic. It's a force me to look up the sky, and then when I look up the sky, and then the little tiny problem becomes sort of insignificant, and it also none of those healthy mental activity, I think.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that aspect of it, but of course, that makes so much sense, because you're out in nature and in a big open space, and you've got an activity to keep you occupied, but it's not a stressful activity. That's so beautiful.
It is nice. It's a nice activity, and then sometimes when I fly 8 kites at once, so that's a lot of work. I've been running constantly.
Yeah.
So that's a cardio workout. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, what are you, like, before we run out of time, I do want to circle back to what you talked about just at the very beginning and landed on a little bit of a teaser about the current project where you're using lots of little plates, but you're thinking about combining them. What's on the horizon there?
Well, I mean, I kind of tried to utilize this like quarantine time, just being away from the my studio. Well, I guess I'm kind of trying to establish small studio, so the work's going to be a lot smaller. So I will have this intaglio print and a bunch of them printed on the Gumpy paper. And then I will make the kites, but it's going to be a lot smaller kites in a way, I guess. And then kites like sculpture, basically the paper with bamboo, basically that's what it is. And then having a bunch of them, I'm talking about maybe 100 of them, so they will interact together and become a sort of installation piece. That's kind of my vision right now. Sort of like school of fish. That's kind of there's a word for that. Mermulation. That's it. That's a fancy word right there.
Mermulation. Yeah.
Mermulation. Yeah.
Beautiful. That sounds wonderful. I guess in that case, just to kind of close up, would you let people know where they can find you and see your kites and kind of stay up to date as things progress, as we're all, keeping in touch digitally with each other more than ever before?
I mean, pretty much I've been utilizing my website as well as the Instagram. Instagram is a lot more direct and swift. So I think that's what I'd like you to take a look at it. You can look under my name in Instagram. I think that's probably the place to find me.
And that's just your first name, Koichi, and then _ Yamamoto. Is that correct?
Koichi Yamamoto. Yeah, Koichi Yamamoto. KOICHIYAMAMOTO. And I think it's easy to find me that way. And I've been making a lot of videos and uploading in the Vimeo too. So I'm gonna connect that together with my website. So all the information will be centralized.
Well, I can definitely put links to everything in the show notes to this episode. Cool. And thank you so much for chatting. This has been absolutely delightful.
Thank you, Miranda. This is it was a fun, especially while I'm talking to you, sun setting. Now it become dark.
Oh.
So it was an interesting transition from the sunset to the night to the evening. So now I see this purple skies and then evening start.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we could chat the evening away and the early morning here. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Yeah, good luck with editing. I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my artwork, and I appreciate your passion for this, the love for the craft, and then you're focusing on it, and then we need more people like you. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's definitely stay in touch, and hopefully we can connect in person in SGCI, next year, if that's probably where it's looking like it's going to. So
we'll survive.
We'll
survive this thing.
Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Carlos Barberina. We talk about his childhood during the revolution in Nicaragua, selling drawings to tourists on the streets in Costa Rica, finding his voice in political printmaking, and so much more. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing help from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.